Well, welcome to the Iowa blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. We're back in the library studio and we're going to continue our series called Return to the Garden. And we have delineated why Yahweh spoke of the opportunity to be restored with ashes at his summation of the experience in Eden after Adam and Chawa and Hasatan had been expelled from the garden. We heard him say that, the option was that you're either going to return to the dust of the earth, which means that your body and soul will just dissipate to nothing, or there was the opportunity to be restored based upon the ashes. And since afar was used in that context, it made sense for us to turn to the passage in the Torah that explains how that's possible, which is Numbers 5. And in Bamidbar 5, we have the story of how the religiosity of the chosen people of Israel becomes so egregious that God has to divorce Israel. And that divorce decree, of course, is presented in the book of Hosea. And for to be Torah compliant, God can't go back and marry the even though it's symbolic Israel after the divorce, but his beloved son can. And so Dowd is symbolically being wed to Yisrael when he returns on Yom Kippurim, once Yisrael is purged of her religious guilt. And that is the purpose of the ash mixed with water of the Adamah Parah. So that is what we're talking about here. I think you can see that we have an attentive Wookiee who's trying to pay attention as we proceed. All right, so now that we understand that the opportunity and really the ultimate result is to be restored by the ash and the water that is presented in Numbers 5, then we have to go forward in the Torah to Numbers 15 and then ultimately Numbers 19. You see, in Numbers 15, there's a long discussion about how the children of Israel, who are now literally children because everyone over the age of 20 has been eliminated from the from contention to enter the promised land because of their attitude during the exercise of the spies. And God goes into considerable lengths to say that ultimately Israel will be restored by a ram, a bull, and a goat. And that in the end, during Taruw'ah, it's going to be the bull who will purge the mortal remnant of Israel, those who are guilty of religious malfeasance, but through omission rather than commission. And that will enable them to return to the ram, who is the suitor, the groom, if you will, of Numbers 5. And then in Numbers 19, we have the story of the Adamah Parah. And what's so interesting about this is that the Adamah Parah, this bloody red man of the earth who is a productive bull, is responsible for purging Yisrael of her religious guilt. And when you recognize what comes next, which is Numbers 20, which is the most horrid story in the Torah, it's about the meltdown of the waters of Meribah. What we find is that when you're dealing with the adulterous woman of Numbers 5, it is this very guilt that is still staining the souls of Israelites to this very day that is purged by the water and the ash of the test for purification that is presented in the 5th chapter of Numbers. So all of these things mesh together. So we're looking forward to having a more complete and contextual picture of how God intends to resolve the problem of his people's continued embitterness. So even before we return to the Torah and we examine what is stated in Numbers 15 and Numbers 19, I think we are best served to ponder the prophetic implications of Yeshaya 17 so that we know the identity and the timing of this profoundly important purge. Unless you know who is being invited, when it's going to occur, where it's going to transpire, it's really tough to capitalize upon it. So I want to venture into Yeshaya, Isaiah, in the 17th chapter so that we gain an appreciation of this. And while this will transpire on Taruw'ah during the Shabbat of the 23rd and the 24th of September in year 6000 Yah, which is less than 8 years from now, be advised that Shabuwah will be the last opportunity to leave this planet before it quite literally spins out of control in anti-Semitic rage. A great deal is going to occur following Shabuwah, particularly in May 22nd of 2026, which is when I think we will witness the forfeiture of the very heart of Israel, where Donald Trump and the United States will be the great betrayer and reward the Muslims with a state carved out of the very center of Israel. It's going to be almost identical to what Neville Chamberlain did to appease the Nazis and giving them the high ground of Czechoslovakia right before the start of World War II. And then on June 11th of 2027, also a Shabbat, that is when the harvest of Shabuwah will take place. And so we have a lot we can ponder here relative to what's going to occur. We also know that even following that, it's going to be the 14th of Abib, April 18th in 2030, when the two witnesses arrive to confront the Toraless one and encourage Yehudim to participate in that final Lakot, that gleaning, during the final celebration of Taruw'ah before our King's return, the 24th now of September of 2033. The planet, of course, between now and then is going to falter and billions are going to die. It's going to be a horrid period over the next 7 years and 9 months. So as we contemplate what Yahweh reveals, we'll find our place in time. We have witnessed much of what is presented in these verses through one. We know that what's going to transpire over this period. We realize that there is going to be an influx of jihadi Muslims and faux Palestinians ransacking Israel. As a result, the conception of this terrorist state carved out of the heart of Israel is now imminent. The harvest of standing grain of Shabuwah and of the Zarowa is approaching, and we're responsible now for cultivating it. So let's turn to Isaiah 17. It begins, a prophetic pronouncement and timely declaration regarding the tremendous burden of Damascus, which means weeping. Behold, Damascus weeping is revolting, it's diseased, it's degenerate, and will come and go by force, as it is changed without consent, then abandoned as the residents depart from the forsaken city. Then there will be a twisted and tangled heap of destruction and fallen rubble. Yeshaya 17:1. The verb masa is equally at home describing a burden, declaring a prophetic statement, which is why I included both thoughts in what I have just shared with you. Damask, which is how it's written in the Great Isaiah Scroll, is the name of the Syrian capital. It also speaks of crying, of weeping, of wailing. It is relevant because both will come to an end over the next few years. As a verb, sure is one of those that's important to us. It means to come and go, to turn away from something and leave, thereby departing. As an adjective, sur conveys degenerate and unrestrained. In this statement, it is shaped by the very rare hopeful participle, making it both a verb and a noun, which is a subject, to internal forces that it cannot resist, suggesting that an armed and violent insurrection by Syrians against Syrians is in the offing. And isn't that what we have just witnessed? The result will be a twisted and tangled heap of destruction and collapsed rubble. And in this regard, Mapala is from Niphal, which reminds us not only of the fall of man, but also the elimination of the Nephilim during the flood, because they became, in God's terminology, Hamas, which means cruel and violent terrorists. Well, now that the U.S. has created the Islamic State out of the awakening program in Iraq and given it control over Damascus by way of the CIA and providing arms to it, and they have captured much of Syria, this prophecy is not only well underway, the conclusion is now inevitable. Within the next year, Islamic jihadists will rally in Damascus as Israel bombs the remainder of the city into rubble, causing the remaining Muslims to leave and to march on Jerusalem. The same thing, and the same succession of events, if you will, is underway and still continuing in Jordan, where the Aurora, the repudiated outcasts and the repugnant refugees that are pretending to be Muslims currently infest the Arnon Valley. The text of the prophecy reads, "The inhabited and terrorized populations and anguished inhabitants of cities filled with disgusting religious temples and shrines, as well as wrathful donkeys, will be abandoned and deserted, rejected and damned of Aurora, of the repudiated outcasts, these repugnant refugees of the Arnon Valley and Ammon Jordan. For there will be roaming animals fighting in militant militias, along with their helpers, but they will cease and prostrate themselves because there will be no one left for them to terrorize." Yashaya, Isaiah 17:2. Now, which was rendered in the plural form, encouraging us to consider its many possibilities, is often translated as cities, and it speaks of inhabitants of populated places. But more than this, also addresses anguishing anxiety and terrorism emanating from religious shrines. It can also depict the disposition of a jackass. Aurora is the Arnon Valley in Jordan. It means stripped and destitute, as a repudiated outcast and thus a refugee. Its verbal root is arar, meaning to strip, to lay bare, and to break. It is an apt depiction of the Muslims claiming to be refugees in the shadow of Hermon. The verb azab carries a host of negative connotations, as most who have read the books of the Yada series are well aware. There's even one that is entitled Azab. It means to be abandoned, deserted, and forsaken, even rejected. It can also speak of being left behind. This is interesting because it means that the malcontent Muslim Fakistanians living there will either abandon the refugee camps to join the great jihad against Israel, or they will be rejected and deserted by other Muslims, noting that the so-called Palestinians are despised amongst other Muslims. They just like it when they attack Jews, otherwise they hate them. And I suspect that some of both of these things are going to occur. As for Adar, it reveals that these rejects and malcontents will be found lacking and that they will ultimately fail. The verbal root affirms that they will consider themselves to be militants and helpers, which is especially relevant to those of us who know the history of Islam, where the helpers were second-class Muslim militants from Yathrib, today's Medina, who were often shortchanged when terrorizing Muhammad's rivals. It's a huge part of Islam to speak of the immigrants from Gabry'el and the helpers who were the pagan converts in Yathrib. Now, affirming the intent of this association, the Islamic terrorists will prostrate themselves in service to Satan. And even more telling, following Allah's Quranic orders, they will terrorize everyone, including Muslims, fighting until there is no one left to kill. Muslims are even better at killing Muslims than they are non-Muslims. Prophecy continues. Then the fortifications and defensive structure will cease on the Shabbat, concluding as a result of Ephraim, which is Israel, along with the government out of Damascus, including the residue left of Aram, Syria, consistent even with the manifestation of power and overall significance of the children of Israel. He, by desire and choice, will actually continue to exist, prophetically declares Yahweh the vast array of spiritual messengers. Yeshayah, Isaiah 17:3. So the more we consider these words, the more it appears that Israel will see trouble in the offing and will seek to nip it in the bud, consistent with the preemptive strikes prior to the Six-Day War in 1967, and then again in the recent bombings, both of Hezbollah in Lebanon and of the fundamentalist Muslims of the Shiite variety in Iran. The most decisive expression of the Israeli might could occur on a Shabbat, such that the governing structures of the Syrian regime fall yet again. I have seen news reels out of Damascus in the last few days that show Muslim jihadists of the Islamic State taking to the streets, shouting with their weapons held in the air that their intent is to march into Jerusalem and slaughter Jews. And then today we have Jolani looking at drones that he has acquired from other Muslim nations, perhaps NATO and the United States, perhaps Turkey, and how he plans to coordinate all aspects of the Islamic militias in Syria against, of course, their only enemy, which would be Israel. So we're witnessing this prophecy unfold. So the Syrian Civil War, as managed by the United States CIA, began in the spring of 2011. Eventually, it led to Islamic State terrorists, also sponsored by the United States and Turkey, overthrowing the Russian and Iranian-sponsored Ba'athist regime of Bashar al-Assad. It fell, as the prophecy portends, in December of 2024. And as we have seen, things have only gotten worse from there. Regime change never works. Based upon this narrative, I'm expecting that the populated areas in and around Damascus will continue to be destroyed as Muslims vie with rival gangs for power. And while we have witnessed a horrific invasion of so-called Palestinians from Gaza into Israel under the context of al-aqsa flood, in the next assault, al-aqsa 2.0, malcontent Muslims will also come through Syria from Turkey as well, and they will flood in from Jordan and Egypt, dwarfing the scale of al-aqsa flood as it transpired on October 7th of 2023. And in the midst of this great desolation, the world will compel Israel to sacrifice land for unfulfilled promises of peace, making the tiny nation surrounded by religious adversaries indefensible. And this is the event that begins the time of troubles, a 7-year ordeal that culminates in year 6,000 Yah, which is 2033. Now, since it is likely that Syrian jihadists will join Muslim militants from other nations in pursuit of al-aqsa flood 2.0, it is unlikely that Israel will decapitate the Islamic State snake at this time. So this could be Yashaya reporting the triggering event for the imposition of the Islamic State carved out of the heartland of Israel. While the obliteration of Gaza in response to al-aqsa flood 1.0 pushed the world toward this recognition of a two-state dissolution of Israel, a preemptive strike against the Islamic State in Syria, which the West has embraced and which has become the pet of Donald Trump, may be the catalyst for the final betrayal of God's people. Matter of fact, Donald Trump has specifically threatened Israel and told Israel, don't you dare attack Syria, because he thinks Jolani is handsome. I think he's got a crush on the man. Another way to view this harbinger of tomorrow is to see it as a telescoping of time, with the events transpiring during the 7 years of the time of Israel's troubles as they all come together. So if this is the case, the prophet is explaining that on Taruw'ah in year 6,000 Yah, 2033, all of Israel's foes will be eliminated, while the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah restores the final remnant of Yisrael. Or perhaps both implications were intended, with Yahweh layering insights upon observations. Now, in this regard, it would be natural from Yashaya, Isaiah's point of view, to want us to know that even in Israel's darkest hour, and this will be its bleakest moment in its entire history, even as the nation is being attacked and torn apart, there will be modest victories along the way. And more importantly, the story concludes with Israel's survival. And when that occurs, it will not be the result of the might of the nation, but instead through the sacrifice of the Parra, this productive bull whose afar ashes will afar cover and protect God's people. Now, should you think that this may be a reach, consider the fact that Ephraim is the plural of afar, of afar, in the conjunction in conjunction with Parra. Afar is a covering akin to a bandage. Afar reveals that the wound is finally going to be protected and allowed to heal, because the malady has been concealed in the ashes. Parra explains that the treatment will be provided by a productive bull. Then, in the plural, this would signify a double dose, which means that this bull and his ashes are doubly protective and productive in promoting Israel's healing. So while Ephraim is typically considered the northern kingdom of Israel, representing the 10 tribes which were hauled into oblivion by the Assyrians 2,700 plus years ago, this prophecy foretells that God's people will be reconstituted, which of course happened in 1948, and then healed, which will occur in 2033. And with Haya scribed, the verb to exist, it will be, and they call imperfect jusive, then Israel's continued existence will be predicated upon decisions Yehud and Ephraim make regarding the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. Particularly telling in this regard, this statement was delivered in Yahweh's voice through Yashaya, with God Naom prophetically declaring this pronouncement for our benefit. With this preamble that reads like a blend of future history and today's headlines, we are confronted with a prophecy that follows that most don't even know how to process. You see, Yahweh foretold 2,700 years ago that Israel would be diminished in size, and that this would occur as a result of the events that transpire in Syria and the rise of terrorism in and around Damascus at this time. The text reads, and it will actually transpire at this moment, in that day, that the size and the significance, the power and prestige of Jacob, which is Israel, will be decreased to the point of no longer being sustainable or viable, thus indefensible. The fattest, best protected, and most important place at the midsection of his physical existence will be leaned and shrink, weakened, and wastefully impoverished, even participating in his own destruction. Yeshaya, Isaiah 17:4. So as a result of what we have read and considered leading up to this pronouncement, with the undoing of Syria, the unrest in Jordan, and the preemptive strike against the rising tide of Islamic jihadists in Damascus, Israel is going to suffer a devastating blow. The resulting formation of a legitimized terrorist entity will significantly diminish the nation's size and standing. With the assignment of Islamic State carved out of Israel's heart, the Jewish nation will no longer be viable. This surrender of Israel and their land is addressing what's called the two-state solution. It's a capitulation that rewards the Muslims seeking to exterminate Jews, doing so with an Islamic entity that is carved out of the land that God gave his people. The result will thin Israel at the waist, where 70% of Israelis currently reside. The nation is going to become indefensible, opening the floodgate for al-aqsa 2.0. A 1,000 times more horrendous repetition of Muhammad's raid on the Jewish farming community of Qatsyr that transpired 1,400 years ago, and will be equally 1,000 times worse than Sinwar's assault on the Israeli kibbutzim on October 7th of 2023. I'm sorry, but the prophets have foretold that 2 out of every 3 Jews are going to die. This is going to be worse than the Holocaust. It's not God's doing. It's Israel's undoing. Rabbis created Islam. Had they not sold Talmud readings to Muhammad, Islam would not exist to this day. Rabbis are unwilling to fight for the survival of Israel against the monster that they have made. Israel's a house divided with Marxists who, around the world, are anti-Semitic and despise Israel, wanting to destroy, eradicate the Jewish state. And even those that might be in the middle are lost because they're fighting a war against Hamas or Hezbollah or the Revolutionary Guards or the Islamic State, but never just against Islam. Never. And it was Islam that killed Jews 1,400 years ago with Muhammad's raid on Qatsyr, and It was Islam again that launched al-aqsa flood. And it will be Islam that launches the Great Jihad. And because Israel is fighting a symptom as opposed to the actual foe, using bullets and bombs as opposed to words, and has not returned to Yahweh, it's going to be devastating. The good news is it's going to be sufficiently horrible that there will be a significant number of Jews who will finally realize they can't trust the IDF. And most certainly can't trust their politicians. Absolutely cannot trust their rabbis. And with the IDF, politicians, and the rabbis sidelined, and death lurking around every corner, some are going to return to Yahweh. And that will be this very taruw'ah harvest that we have been addressing. Now, the most troubling aspect of the foregoing is the Niphal stem and the imperfect conjugation when it modifies raza, because it means that the Bashar, this embodiment of Israel, will not only contribute to its own demise, but that it has been and will continue to act suicidally. Yeah, you don't want to have the Niphal stem shape the meaning of a verb that is applied to you and that is devastating, because it means that you are participating in your own demise. When you participate in your own death, that's suicide. Yep, that is because the Niphal stem conveys the idea that the subject here, which is the Bashar representing Jacob, therefore Israel, the nation of Israel, will both carry out and receive the consequence of being reduced in size and destroyed. In this regard, Israel's demolition of Gaza and recompense for the Islamic savagery on October 7th has proven counterproductive, with the entire world turning against the Jewish state. But of course, it's worse than that, because Israel, having turned the world against it, is now a vassal of Donald J. Trump. And Trump is the person Christians know as the Antichrist. He is the corporeal manifestation of Satan that's presented throughout the prophets. And he's the great betrayer of Israel. And they have entered into a love affair with the very man who's going to rip them to shreds. Israel is indeed participating in their own demise. Now, there is another potential layer to this pronouncement, because it is the Bashar, the physical body of the human herald, that's going to be bludgeoned on Taruw'ah to spare the remnant of Yisrael that's going to be the thing that finally resolves this crisis. And while his sacrifice will not be wasted, he will choose his fate, knowing that he, as the Adamah Parah, will be emaciated. Now, as we move into this next statement, Haya will occur, was scribed in the third person masculine singular, call, stem, and perfect conjugation. Not once, but twice. This can convey it will be, with it representing the aforementioned thinned Bashar body of Jacob, or the upcoming Qatsyr, who is the reaper, as a thing or as a person, both of which are masculine and singular. The other option is to render Haya as he will be, with he belonging to Jacob, therefore Israel, and the Bashar as the herald, or the Qatsyr as a title of the individual who is serving as the reaper and who is enabling this result. And with Yahweh, there's often and usually many layers of truth in every statement. Before we consider the profoundly important implications of this ongoing prophecy, recognize that Yahweh has scheduled 3 harvests. The first of these is Bakurim, first fruits. It's a barley harvest. It occurred on the 16th of Abib in the spring of year 4000 Yah, 33 CE. Dowd, therefore, our king, savior, fulfilled it 2,000 years ago. And it was after he had honored the promise of Pesach, serving as the lamb with his bashar, and his nefesh soul carrying our guilt into Sheol on matzah. Now, the second harvest of the 3 is Shabuwah, which is the promise of 7. It celebrates an ingathering of standing and mature grain, and in particular, varieties of wheat, in that it is observed 50 days after unyeasted bread each year. The timing is late May or early June. The final ingathering associated with the annual Mow'ed occurs on the first day of the 7th month, which is typically late September. This brings us to the third and final harvest, which in this case, we're told is going to be the gleaning, the Lakot of Yom Taruw'ah. And that is the day of the herald. And it begins with this gleaning of olives, and it continues with what will be the greatest show on earth. When it is fulfilled less than, just 8 years from now, it's going to feature Eliah serving as the master of ceremonies, the best ever. Satan will ultimately be bludgeoning the Bashar herald, just his body, however, the Bashar of the Bashar, if you will, being portrayed as the Adamah Parah, this bloody red man of the earth who is a productive bull. And of Yahweh then releasing a torrent of waters while igniting the flames around the sacrifice to prepare the remnant of Yisrael for the king's return, as she is purged of her guilt as the adulterous woman in year 6000 Yah, this transpiring on September 24th, 2033. By the way, just as an insight, over the last few days, I had mentioned previously that Joe has created what he likes to call the Yada Torah font. We've created a much more effective way to convey the intent of the original pictographic letters that were used to write the Torah and to inscribe those 2 tablets in stone, where each of the letters depicts either something that is human related, like an eye, a mouth, teeth, an arm outstretched with an open hand, the palm of a hand, a human head and profile, a man standing and looking up to God, or things that are important in the lives of the people, like a home, like a ram, like a plow, like a fence that can be serve as a form of protection, as a basket to collect things. The sun on the horizon as the start or the conclusion of a day. He has created what I think is really an excellent font. It resolves all of the problems that have been manifest in the ones that have currently been available, where some letters are way too small, some are way too big, some are way too wide, some are way too tall, some are drawn radically differently than others. They have hard lines to them, which wouldn't have been possible with the quill of the day, and they just don't. And they don't have the appropriate spacing between letters, so they all have a tendency to run together. So we've created the Yada Torah font, and I think you're going to like it a lot. And we'll create a way for you to be able to download it download it and use it going forward. The other thing is that my wife and Joe had been asking me to create a timeline. And this timeline really of only important dates from the depiction of creation and our time in the garden all the way to Sukkah in the end. And I completed that about an hour or so ago. I think it has 140 dates along the way, with about 25 of those or so, maybe 30 highlighted as particularly important. And they're going to use that to create a much cleaner, more effective timeline than we've ever had before, but also put some graphics and illustrations along with it, photographs with it, to make it a more revealing kind of a presentation. And that is underway as well. As another program note, as of yesterday or the day before, Joe was able to get all of the books now published, all of them under the new format with the menorah at the top. And it's a much cleaner cover in its presentation. He went through throughout all of these books and was able to add the book name, the volume name, and the chapter name on the top, something I've wanted for a long time. And he's really cleaned up the presentation, having a much more consistent presentation in terms of the formatting of the internal books themselves, so that they're all now available again at Amazon in the new format, including the most recent that we have published, this being Time of Trouble. And, it's 825 pages and outlines everything that's going to happen between now and then. New art illustrations, like here's a new image for the Azab book as well. And really a redo also of our books on Christianity, Twistianity, which we're doing a series downstairs. And we need to return to our programs on goddamn religion too. But he's also finished those. So we now have every book in the Yada Yahweh library that has been restated and restored and rescored, if you will, into the new format, with really very, very effective covers and overall presentation. So that is done too. All of the flip books have been updated on the site, and we are now we're working to create a much more effective double search mechanisms for the site. One will search everything on the site, including the books, just for just the search function. You type in a word or a phrase, and it will find every place that it's mentioned, whether it's in a vlog or one of the books. And the last is the Torah addresses, so that you can look for every passage that I have translated throughout those 25,000 pages, and immediately go to it and see how it was presented, and then even go to the actual book, and the flip books down below. And in addition to the flip books now, for those who preferred the books being presented in a more kind of standard online format, the flip books is really much nicer for your phone and for other things like that. But he's also created a PDF version of every one of the books. And we're about to go into more interesting things to make the yadayah.com website even more interesting. So I was reminded of that when I said there are two more potential dates for the Shabuwah Qatsyr that are being presented here in Yeshayah, Isaiah 17:5. And of course, as I have shared, the first of these is on the 22nd of May of 2026. And if that is when it occurs, then it would allow for 7 years and 4 months for the time of Jacob's troubles to ensue prior to its conclusion on Taruwah in 2033. And I think that it's highly likely that the time of Jacob's troubles begins here. I think it's highly likely that that Israel suffers a Neville Chamberlain moment at the hands of Donald Trump, and the United States tearing out its heart to create a Muslim state in its midst by that date. I am hoping, expecting, since there is a second possibility that is set within Daniel that points directly towards the Shabbat of the 11th of June in 2027. That as being the other date for this harvest. And if that is the case, it will be 6 years and 3 months between the inception and the conclusion of the time of troubles, unless the time of troubles commences with the Shabbat that is less than 6 months from now, and that the harvest follows. One of the reasons for that second consideration is that it could well be that the time of Jacob's troubles does start 7 years and 4 months before it concludes, and that would make it 22 May of 2026. But that the al-aqsa flood 2.0, this great jihad against Israel, that's going to be so deadly for Jews, and not just in Israel, the great jihad is going to be perpetrated around the world. That because of the ferocity of that, it could be then that God says, there's just no point in putting my covenant family at risk. I need to renew and recharge them anyway for the role that they're going to play, beginning at the midpoint of the time of troubles in 2030, when Elia and Yada returned, and probably with a team of supporters. So this is why both dates are possible, and the justification for both. And personally, I happen to prefer the fact that I can present to you options than I am when I say this is certain. And I can tell you that Taruwah, the 23rd and 24th of September in 2033, for the fulfillment of Taruwah, October 2nd of 2033, and then the 7th of October, is certain. There's zero wiggle room there, because it's your 6,000 Yah, and it's exactly 40 Yobel from the dates that Dowd himself gave us for the fulfillment of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim in your 4,000 Yah. So there's some things where they're just absolute certainty, which is never my favorite. I prefer to provide information to you such that it requires you to process it and make what you think is the most reasoned decision. This is the most effective way to teach. It's the most effective way to empower. It's the most effective way to learn. It's the most effective way for you to be effective. So I prefer the possibilities that exist with Shabuwah greatly over the certainty that exists with Taruwah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. That might sound strange to you, but my experience is that we're all better off if we know where to look for information, and then we are required to think it through and to make an informed decision based upon that information. So as for Taruwah, as I've said, that date is etched in stone, with the Lakot occurring on Friday evening, September 23rd, and the sacrifice transpiring the following morning. Also relevant, there are 3 Zarowa, because that's going to come up in the statements in God's story. Moshe, serving as the strong arm of Yahweh, was deployed to free his people from slavery and Mitzrayim, and to bring them to the promised land. Once there, Dowd would rise and engage to sow the seeds that we are currently tending through his Mizmor and Mashal, particularly as the king became the greatest of the Zarowa by fulfilling Passover as the sacrificial lamb. And today, well, now it's Yada's turn to serve as that final Zarowa, cultivating these harvests so that they are as productive as possible. And we don't need a large contingent. All we need is the kind of people who are now really dramatically and actively and productively engaged. And we have a wonderful support team that is doing everything it is possible to convey Yahweh's message in as many places and and as professionally and as boldly as is possible. And that team is more than sufficient to get the job done that Yahweh once carried out during the return to the garden, where we'll have 1,000 years to work together as a team. So a tight team of right-minded people is all we need to get this done. I'm going to continue to share all of this because the more right-minded people, the better. But there really is no pressure on us, not for Shabuwah, not for Taruwah, not for any of this during this process. So all of this is, of course, foretold to occur as Israel's preemptive bombardment devastates the defenses of Syria and buildings crumble in Damascus, leading to the imposition of an Islamic state upon Israel to appease those seeking to exterminate Jews. Boy, that's hard to convey. So in the immediate aftermath of the Israeli action, the two-state dissolution will make the Jewish nation smaller and, of course, indefensible, which is the intent. Now, Shabuwah is a Qatsyr. That means it's a harvest of standing grain. It is followed by Taruwah, which is a Lakot, a gleaning, 7 years later of olives. The promise of sevens will materialize at the outset of the time of Israel's troubles with a shimmering stream of souls leaving an anguished planet for a joyous experience in Shamayim, this occurring on the Shabbats of either 22 May 2026 or 11 June 2027. Then, as the Sarar Yaakov comes to a frantic and horrific close, as a consequence of the adversary's manipulations, a final few will be withdrawn on Taruwah, Friday evening at sunset, September 23rd, 2033, with yet another stream of light headed out of harm's way. Before I return to the text here, I do want to share something with you. I am just now finishing a renewed translation and focus, really deep dive into what's presented at Yashaya 57. I think what I had shared with you is that I knew that in translating Yashaya, I'd come across a promise that there would be a harvest, and when that ingathering occurred, people would vanish, they would disappear, and that the world wouldn't understand where they've gone. And I knew that was in Yashaya. And it was just so frustrating here about 2 weeks ago. I said, I need to work towards that because I think I owe it to the covenant family to assure everyone that when God speaks of this Qatsyr and this Lakot, this harvest of standing grain and this gleaning of olives, that he is not talking about the stuff that you grind to make bread or the stuff that you crush to make olive oil. He's talking about souls. Now, well, I think that should be obvious. It's nice when Yahweh makes it even more obvious. And when I inquired all manner of search engines, artificial intelligence, to tell me where in Isaiah it said that people are going to disappear and no one's going to notice or care. And I must have run that inquiry 20 times using different words and looking at every possible result. Nada. Couldn't find it. So frustrating, and it's so obvious. Anyway, I just went about rereading all of the prophetic text and found it and decided, okay, well, I'll retranslate it and we'll analyze it and see, does that really say what it says? And I want to assure you we will get there, because it's important that you know that this is going to be a harvest of souls and we are going to disappear. All right. Now, staying in, well, that was actually in Yashaya 2. That's Yashaya 57. This is Yashaya 17. So 40 chapters in advance of that affirmation. So this reads, then he will actually be, and it will come to exist. Remember, I told you it could be translated as he if the Qatsyr is a title, or if talking about Jacob as Israel, if Israel was being is the state. So it can be it as Israel, he as if Jacob is representing Israel, he as if the Qatsyr is to be considered a title for a man, or just it if it is the harvest as a thing. Those are your choices. I personally think all apply, but your option. Remember, I like it when there is potential for you to be able to make your own decision based on the information and decide if you like it being a thing, as in a harvest, a person, as in the Qatsyr, the reaper of that harvest, a person in the sense of Jacob representing Israel. All of those things are possible. And it's a better learning experience. And I think there's more credibility associated with the idea of presenting them all to you and letting you decide which one or ones you think God intended to communicate. So then he will actually be, and it will come to exist, that someone who can be compared to the Qatsyr, the reaper of the harvest, will be collecting and assembling the ingathering and withdrawing while escorting. Ashaf, gathering, receiving, removing, and accompanying the harvest, called infinitive. Remember, the participle and the infinitive are verbal nouns. So you can render the term as a title, a thing, a person, or as an action. So in this case, Qatsyr is the reaper of the harvest. And then Asaph was written as Qatsyr would be a verb and a noun, and Asaph as a call infinitive. So we have here literally the Qatsyr, the reaper of the harvest, is going to be collecting and assembling the ingathering and withdrawing while escorting them. And it's while escorting the Kamah. So Yeshua is being very clear, since the Torah describes Shabuwah as a harvest of mature standing wheats. Kamah means standing grain, and therefore it's the grain that is established, upright, on the stalk, in the field, fully grown and mature. It's from kum, to rise, to be empowered, to persist, to be established, to fulfill, and to confirm. So that's just the first part of it. So we've just gone from Israel's going to be dissected. There's going to be a huge hunk right out of the heart of Israel that thins the nation at the waist, that makes the nation indefensible, which is obviously the quote-unquote two-state solution that's going to be imposed. And that when that is imposed, it says that he will actually be, and it will come to exist. This is called perfect third person masculine singular. That's someone who can be compared to Ka, the Qatsyr, the reaper of the harvest, will be collecting and assembling the ingathering and withdrawing while escorting the Kamah, this standing grain. And I want to emphasize two things here. One is that standing grain, Kamah, that's grain which is established. That's grain which is upright. That's grain which is still on the stalk and still, part of the field, in the field, doing its job, grown, mature, and from a verb that means to rise, to be empowered, to persist, and be established, to fulfill and confirm. This is a marvelous affirmation that we're right. That if you're going to participate in the shabuw'ah Qatsyr, then you better be engaged. You better be, as are so many now and part of the covenant family, helping the Zarowa, helping the Qatsyr, helping the Bashar, helping Yada. The final Zarowa, get this done. It's clear that these are individuals who are standing up at this time, taking a stand at this time, actually in the field, mature, responsible, empowered, persisting, here to fulfill and confirm. That's so many of you that this describes. And I find it so reassuring to see it here in the handbook for how to proceed through these harvests. It was written by Yeshayah in Yahweh's voice. The second thing is selfish for me, so I'm going to go the other way here, because when he talks in this presentation of the Kama, which is the standing grain of Shabuw'ah, it's Ashaf, which means that the reaper himself, who is collecting and assembling this ingathering, is going to withdraw with it. He's going to escort the standing grain. He's going to gather it in. He's going to receive it. He's going to remove it. And he's going to accompany the harvest. That is not the case, however, with the verb that is used to describe what's going to occur during the Taruw'ah Lakot, which reminds me of why Yahweh told me when I was asking what's going to happen when we leave for the Taruw'ah harvest, where he said, "Where do you think you're going?" Well, in this case, I get to go too. So I guess I'm pleased by the fact that Asaph indicates that I get to escort and I get to accompany this harvest. And even better, I guess this is also selfish, is that now that I've come to know Team Yah and how much just more enjoyable, reliable, capable, honorable Team Yah is than what we lost in the great Mother Goddess shakeout. I'm glad that it's only those of you who are engaged, who are mature, who are, and that's really a difference. I was talking to Leah this morning, and that just say the big difference now is we're not looking out of our shoulder all the time. We're not constantly saying, "Oh boy, what's going to happen with there? Oh, there's another infight there. Oh, there's," because we had a psychopath that was just constantly stirring everything up. And so many people that were susceptible to this psychopath that were, oh God, it was just always this mess. And you didn't know, you have to look for every step that you weren't going to create a mess. So I'm delighted that those I'm going to be accompanying of the standing grain, well, you are established, you're in the field, you're mature, you're working it, you're empowered, you're persisting right to the end. So we get to hang with with our friends, with our family. And so I've got to tell you, as we went back and fine-tuned this translation, I just love the first part of it. I mean, love it, love it, love it. So then he will actually be, and it will come to exist, that someone who can be compared to the Qatsyr, the reaper of the harvest, will be collecting and assembling the ingathering and withdrawing while escorting the Kama, the standing grain. You know, it's interesting, by the way, just as a side note before I go to the next part of this. You know the difference between a barley harvest and a wheat harvest? Many of you probably do. A barley harvest is cut when the barley is still green and growing in the ear. So it's before it is become hardened. And so it's still, and it can ripen then while it's on the ground. So it can be cut very early in the season, and it's a very unique grain that way. If you were to cut wheat while it is still wet and green, it would rot. And so that's the difference. When you're dealing with Kama and a wheat harvest, it's fully mature. And it's developed some toughness, when you're no longer subject to rot. And you're not going to be laying in the field this time. No laying in the field. This is, you're up, you're working, you're in the field, you're engaged, and you've got some resilience to you, some toughness. And I personally think that is a marvelous way to describe it. So I like the metaphor that God used. Now this continues, and it says, and this Zarowa, now he's talking about the Qatsyr reaper, isn't he? And this Zarowa, the one cultivating the seed sown for this harvest to be fruitful and productive, he will reap the harvest from the field with unfolding up implications, even as time is cut short during an anguishing period. He's going to not Qatsyr this time, but this is the verb Qatsyr. So it means with insufficient time, just barely in the nick of time, and time in short order during a highly vexing and troubling period. He's going to produce the yield, and he's going to bring in the crop. This is really challenging working conditions, right up to the last minute. There is no alternative. There is no, let's reboot. Nope. We're right up to the last possible limit, which is why I kind of like a 11 June time. And so he's going to produce, he's going to yield and bring in that crop, called imperfect, which means ongoing implications, quite literally third person, masculine singular. The Zarowa is a guy. Now, what's also interesting here is that Zarowa is a feminine noun, but God knows that the Zarowa is a man. And so what God is doing is he's using the title Zarowa because it's so perfect for the strong arm of God, being Moshe leading the children of Israel out of Mitzrayim and to the promised land. And then the Torah's definition of Zarowa, which is the sacrificial lamb, and that being Dowd as he fulfills Passover. And then the final Zarowa, based upon the verbal root of Zarowa from Zerah, cultivating seeds sown for a harvest to be fruitful and productive, being the last of the three. So God loves the title Zarowa. It fits all three men in different roles. But he is not fooled into thinking that Moshe, Dowd, or I are girls. And so the verb which follows, so Zarowa is the subject, the verb which follows was written third person masculine singular, which says, this Zarowa, the one cultivating the seeds for a productive harvest, he will reap the harvest from the field with unfolding implications, even as time is cut short during an anguishing period. This is something that God does, by the way, quite often when addressing his Ruach. Ruach is a feminine noun, meaning spirit. But when God uses Ruach and how he's going to engage through the Ruach, the verb that follows is always written in third person masculine singular, which means that he's using a term which has the implications he wants to convey, but it doesn't turn God or any part of God into a woman. So the same thing is true here. So these are a marvelous term with Qatsyr, because it tells us that this harvest is going to be reaped. It's going to come from the field. So we're still engaged. It's going to have unfolding implications over time with the imperfect conjugation. And it also conveys, Qatsyr conveys that time is in short supply and that time is going to be cut short, so that we need to be focused and get this job done. There's no opportunity for a slip up. We don't get to take a Sabbath break now with so much on the line and it happening and coming together so quickly. So this is going to happen in short duration, as time grows nigh. And the time according to Qatsyr is anguishing. So it's as time grows short and a vexing occasion that he is going to produce the yield and bring in the crop. For the first fruits flowing as a stream of grain. This is Shabuwah. I think I've shared this before, and it was one of those visual pictures that so many in the covenant family resonated with. This whole idea of Shabuwah is the plural of Shabuwah, which speaks of a flowing river, a torrent of floodwaters, something that moves from one place to another in linear fashion. And that it's, this case, it would be a stream of grain. It can be a stream of fruit or a stream of grain. Here it's a first fruits flowing as a stream of grain, moving forthright in a linear fashion from one place to another. That would be from earth to heaven. Pretty neat, huh? In addition, this is when tell you what, when you're dealing with Yeshaya, one verse can be a book. And this happens to be an example of it. In addition, then, he will actually be such that it will come to exist. Again, we have that opportunity. It's either it or he. So he will actually be such that it will come to exist. That someone comparable to now, not a Qatsyr, but a Lakot. One who gleans the final, smaller, and more challenging ingathering, will rapidly remove what remains. Lakot. This is a man who takes what is left after the initial harvest, even as the yield diminishes and is far more laborious to pick and to collect. It is the peel participle, masculine singular. Of the fruit on the stems, off of the main branch, appearing out of a torrent of floodwaters, moving as a stream from one place to another, all in linear fashion. Shabuwah again, of first fruits as a flowing stream of growing grain. In the profound depths of Ephraim, where the sick will be healed and the defective will be restored, while the feeble falter and the souls of the dead remain. Emek, Ephraim. Yeshaya, Isaiah 17:5. We're just going to touch on some of these themes as we go, and I'm going to return to this same passage as we commence an entirely new show on returning to the garden. Just on this, and you might say, well, how is this returning to the garden? We're going to heaven here. And because those who are part of this Shabuwah harvest, don't get yourself all up in a frenzy saying, wow, I'm going to have a vacation. This is going to be really cool. Going to heaven, going to explore the earth. No, that's not the purpose of this harvest. The purpose of this harvest is to take God's family away, these covenant members away from this terribly vexing time of trouble, so that it becomes a working vacation. It becomes a time, yes, where we can recharge. But this is a time for us to use every moment that we can, to learn as much as we can, to be able to convey Yahweh's purpose, his intent, his message, and therefore, when we return, achieve what needs to be accomplished. We are going to be the most dedicated and devoted workers of what transpires afterwards, not only during the last 3.5 years prior to the end of Israel's troubles, but through the 1,000 years of our return to the garden. So we are literally being equipped and prepared such that we can be the educators and the proper example and those who are devoted to sharing the fruit of the tree of knowledge during the millennial celebration of Sukkah, so that this mortal remnant of Yisrael listens, becomes observant, engages, and shows that they are capable of earning Yahweh's trust. That's our job. So we are being withdrawn to do that job, to be equipped to do that job. I'm trying the best I can to equip us to do that job now. But imagine you're not listening to Yada instruct you on how to do that job, but you're listening to Yahweh teach you how to do that job. Pretty cool. So, as I say, it bears repeating here that there will be two ingatherings during the time of trouble. One at the beginning, the other at the end, with the first more prolific and of wheat, and the other of olives and leaner. The Qatsyr harvester will be Asaph, collecting and assembling this ingathering, receiving, removing, and escorting the kamah, the standing grain, which has become established upright on the stalk and remaining in the field, thus engaged and fully mature. The beneficiaries of this harvest will be kum, ready to rise and to be empowered. They will persist to fulfill their calling, which is to work alongside the Qatsyr and the Lakot, as well as the final Zarowa, on behalf of Yahweh, Goyim, Yisrael, and in the direct line of authority of our king, Dowd. Now, 7 years thereafter, this same individual will serve as a Lakot reaper over a smaller, more challenging and final gleaning. But this time he will not be Asaph escorting those he has gleaned. He is remaining behind to serve the remaining remnant of Israel. So once the so-called Palestinian state has been established, the Shabuwah harvest will be imminent. Whether that is on 6/22/26 or 7/11/27. The final Zarowa, the one cultivating the seed sown for the harvest to be fruitful and productive, will Qatsyr reap this harvest from the field. The Asaph ingathering will be conducted with unfolding implications, even as the opportunity is cut short due to this really anguishing nature of this time. Those enjoying the voyage of a lifetime will witness Shabuwah, first fruits, flowing as a stream of grain. 6 to 7 years thereafter, with considerable additional effort, the olive representing Israel will be ready to glean. This will transpire on Taruwah, Friday evening, the 23rd, in year 6000 Yah. The Qatsyr will still be contributing as a Zarowa. He will serve as the embodiment of the Lakot, the one who gleans the final, smaller, and more challenging ingathering, which is to be removed. And since this is an olive harvest rather than grain, the Shabuwah will be first fruit off the stems of the main branch. These souls, leaving earth for heaven, will appear as a torrent of floodwaters, moving as a stream from one place to another. This is an ode to what will transpire the following morning, when an upwelling of subterranean waters is released from beneath the Temple Mount during the funeral pyre, if you will, of the Adamah Parah, the uplifting and burnt offering of the Adamah Parah. So this is particularly relevant to note that while Zarowa is a feminine title, as I've shared with you, the three individuals who bear it are all men. This is why the verb following the title was presented in the third person masculine singular. This realization will become relevant again as we move into the next statement, where the same phenomenon applies. Also interesting, in the 53rd chapter of Yashayah, which is pursuant to Dowd serving as the sacrificial lamb, the prophetic witness is introduced by two readers, and they're asked if they know the person who is able to deduce the identity of the Zarowa, making it an especially relevant designation because the final Zarowa was the first to identify them. Now, the valley of Ephraim that comes at the end of this statement is actually in Jerusalem. It's immediately adjacent to the southern ridgeline of Mount Moriah. And this places it just below the city of Dowd. However, I suspect that it's the meaning behind the name that caused the prophet to mention it during this sequence of events. So as a result of what follows, many will be Raphaim. They're going to be healed and restored, even as the religious and political die. So when we consider all of this and conclude our review of Yeshaya, Isaiah 17, I'm going to turn to the 56th and the 57th chapters of Isaiah, as I had promised, so that I can assure you that Yahweh is speaking of harvesting souls and only using grain and olives as metaphors, just like the Adamah Parah is not a heifer. But for now, let's stay focused on what is among the most revealing prophetic portrayals of our day. This is, I think, foundational to where we are and what lies before us. I look at this as the pivot point, the fulcrum of where we go from here to there. It is so essential that we understand Yeshaya 17, because it's the place. It is all laid out for us, and the order of events is presented. So Yeshaya's insights are bringing us to a place that few could have imagined, even though his treatise on tomorrow has been available, albeit largely unnoticed, for 27 centuries. So we'll return to this place when we come back to this library studio tomorrow and consider everything that we can glean from this marvelous and exciting time. I thank you for listening.